back to the Jada Willis Experience. I'm joined today with someone that, once again, I stumbled upon on LinkedIn, Laurie Nichols, and she is a succession planning and readiness coach. I mean, she's a myriad of things that she's going to share with you briefly, but I was just really excited to bring an expert onto the Jada Willis Experience because I actually had a prediction 2 years ago that we're going to start seeing CEOs resign from their positions either to retire or actually have new careers, and we wouldn't be ready for it. And so it is perfect timing that we're actually talking about succession planning. So, Laurie, welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Jada. It was exciting to actually get your message on our good friend LinkedIn, and to find that we just had such a connection, partly because of our respective backgrounds, both
Absolutely.
having been partners in businesses that we sold, and so we've been in those succession shoes, and so I'm excited to be here today.
Fantastic. And thank you for agreeing to just have a conversation with me. And I know that our listeners will find so much value from your experience. But as we're all getting to know you, just tell us a little bit more about your background.
Well, I always tell people that I'm a recovering CPA and came to this role of coaching following a 30 plus year career in financial services, 20 of those years as a partner in an independent investment firm. And, it's like as a woman, okay, of a certain age, okay? So, as a woman of a certain age, starting my career during the time of floppy bow ties and very
Mm-hmm.
few women in leadership roles in the investment industry, especially.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was a journey that was not rooted in a lot of confidence and
Right.
belief in what's possible for women. And so I felt during much of it like
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of just making my way. And, there's some real value in that. And you look back after more than a couple of decades and recognize, yeah, some wisdom was gained. And
Sure.
not only that, but it's also this recognition that how many people really, it's almost like rationalize tolerating
Mm.
a life of work that is not awesome
A
and
life of
not
work that's not
enjoyable.
awesome.
And so that is one of the things that really brought me to this place. My former partners and I, we were able to sell our company. And while really grateful, like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
shall we say how grateful I am to be on the
No.
other side of that? But it also is what really allowed me the time and space to reflect, probably for the
Mm-hmm.
first time ever, and
Right.
seeing how powerful and
Mm-hmm.
important it is that we take time for reflection and not waiting until you retire, not
Exactly.
waiting until you have a health issue, not
Mm-hmm.
waiting until you're beyond burned out. And I
Mm-hmm.
started exploring the idea of becoming a coach because I worked with an amazing coach.
Nice.
And that's what brought me here is wanting to share some of that wisdom. And I don't know, it may be a little badass around the edges, but it's really just guide guide by the side, guide from the side kind of energy that I like to bring to my clients so they know that they're supported, they're
Mm-hmm.
heard, they're seen, and yet we're also really focused on what needs to change, where are we
Mm-hmm.
headed.
There is this quiet strength about you, and it is a calmness, and then also just, yeah, again, this strength. And so I really like that you found, and you indicated that there's badass around the edges. I think that's what you, you just mentioned, and I I completely feel that with you, and that's why I'm so eager to dive in and learn more about the process of succession planning and how you help your clients. But bare minimum, every leader needs to be thinking about the succession plan, and not just for
Absolutely.
them but for their organization, right?
Yes.
And so right now there are a lot of organizations that are actually in a talent crisis, and they have and there's a lot of new leaders because there wasn't a plan, for how are they going to develop, train, who's going to take the place. And so, do you concur with my prediction of the exiting of leadership, over the next couple of years?
Absolutely. It's just kind of a reality. We're at that end of the baby boomers, and there's still a lot
Hmm.
of baby boomers that are in those either
Right.
positions of leadership or, a
Hmm.
lot of my clients are professional service firms. They're the people that started their law practice, their accounting firm, their investments, their HR consulting, whatever they did 20,
Right.
30 years ago. And
Hmm.
I don't know about you, but I'm a big believer
Hmm.
that we all have an expiration date, whether we like it or not. And
That's
so
right.
it's kind of like chances are you've built
Hmm.
something that actually has some enterprise value. And if that's the case, let's not leave that to chance. And
Hmm.
you have the
Hmm.
opportunity in many ways. It's kind of a more generous perspective to say, hey, I can develop that next generation of leadership. If they end up taking over the business or stepping into this key role in
Hmm.
my
Hmm.
place, great. But if they don't, I've still contributed to the greater good, and I've
Right.
set us up for better outcomes going forward because we've been intentional. We've invested some time and energy, and even just thinking about it a little bit,
Mhm. No, you're right. If you're a leader and not thinking about succession planning, you're really actually being selfish with your legacy. And
Yes.
and you're not, and I don't know a person that's in leadership that doesn't want to contribute, mentor, coach, train. And if they're not automatically thinking about these things, then I don't know if leadership is the best role for
Well,
them.
and I think that that's what I find a lot in my work is, especially again with these, you know, if you think about somebody that, like even yourself, you had a business, so
Right.
you had the skill that and
Mhm.
the experience that you wanted to bring to the world on your own as an entrepreneur,
Right.
and so a lot of people that have that skill and that experience, it's not that
Mhm.
different from a corporate situation where
Mhm.
somebody gets promoted to national sales director because they're great at sales, but they're not necessarily a leader naturally
Mhm.
or by training. And so I find this a lot in privately owned businesses, especially where
Yeah.
there's a perception that they're the leader because they own it or they're the, okay, air quote alert, they're the
Mhm.
boss. And
Right.
that,
For the boss.
yes, you may be in charge, but that still doesn't mean that you're leading. And I really believe in that idea
Mhm.
of leadership is hearts and minds, and you have to capture both. And to
Right.
your point, that's where that generosity and that legacy
Mhm.
building is possible because it's that in and of itself is a win-win. It's a win for you, it's a win for that person.
Mhm.
And the third win is it's a win for the organization.
There you go. I love it. I completely agree. And I want to learn more about how you help your clients with the actual succession planning process because I think I've talked to leaders and they're just overwhelmed. They don't know where to start. I don't know how to identify, a leader that's going to take my place. Also, I have so much knowledge. How do I just brain dump? So if you can shed some light on any of those issues, that would be helpful.
It's interesting to use that expression brain dump. It's one of my favorites. And it's actually one of the first exercises that I have people do, especially if there's business partners and if there's
Mm,
kind of a, like, you could say an age difference or a generational difference, and one is a
mhm,
likely heir to that kind of main leadership role. But even if it's just you've got great team members, it's getting
mhm,
that leader to think about what are all the things that I do,
mm,
and let's organize them by what do I love to do,
mhm,
what am I good at it, and I like it,
mhm,
what do I have to do,
mm,
versus what do I really hate to do. It could be duplicated in that have to do, but we're really trying to kind of get these things out so that we can think bigger picture of, okay,
right.
here's the stuff that you really love to do. is that a part of your secret sauce in
Mm-hmm.
terms of what's made the business successful? Because if so, each of these items in that list, it's an ingredient, another air quote alert, it's an ingredient that we need to see who's going to replace that. And let's be
Absolutely.
intentional about, who, if you don't have people that can fill these, because the
Mm-hmm.
reality is again, as human beings, any
Mm-hmm.
number of things could happen and poof, we're gone and we're not in that position. So it's a smart
Mm-hmm.
exercise to go through anyways, is to be intentional about saying, even as CEO or partner, who's my backup in these key areas that I still love to do,
I love
and
that.
be intentional, because that's what's going to be missing when you're either winding down. And what I see a lot
Mm-hmm.
is people that the last year or so, the expression that's been getting batted about is the quitting in place. I see
Mm,
leaders kind of quit in place.
for
They've
sure.
started to slow down in terms of how much they're in the office, or any number of ways that their
Mm-hmm.
behaviors are sending the message that they're not in it to win it as
Right.
much as they used to be.
Not
And so,
accessible, not approachable. Right.
and oh, building my weekend home. Well, that's awesome. And yet,
Mm-hmm.
uh, what about? And so it's
Right.
knowing that if you put some of these things in place,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a health issue or you're just ready to start slowing down, you're better prepared for that. They're better prepared for that. The business is better prepared for that slowing down and that
Mm-hmm.
eventual stepping out. I think,
Exactly.
large companies probably think more about this stuff, because if
Mm-hmm.
they're publicly traded, a lot of that. But even large companies with big HR departments don't necessarily do a great job of this.
They don't. And this is an issue whether you're a small business owner, founder, or if you're in a large organization. You're right. I've been doing the corporate life way back when, and there wasn't a great deal of conversation with one of the Fortune 50 companies I was in. So there wasn't a lot of conversation about succession planning. They tried, but the other company was so intentional and had very structured processes and a system for honestly moving up the ranks, and how do you gain promotions, and what does it look like. They actually had a succession plan document, and you could see yourself and how
Yeah.
long you're supposed to be in this role until, because you're a high potential, and then you move to the next box. And it was that regimented, that I don't know. I like the hybrid. Like, there needs to be
Yes.
some room for human, like, human tendencies, human error, all the things, just humans in general, and also allowing for learning new skills and opportunities. So, kind of a mixture of the two. I've found that Nine Box is a really neat tool where you assess, your current team in place. And so you started with really some of the immediate first steps that you can be doing as a leader to
Hmm.
start that succession planning process. And then, do you advise going into also then the more formal approach to, having more of a system of who's taking your place, or maybe it's an apprenticeship program? I don't know. You're the expert. I want to gain your expertise on this.
Well, I think it requires a couple of things. One is there has to be real engagement with whoever you're thinking, because that's another thing that I see a lot. There are
Yeah.
these unspoken assumptions about who's going to do this, that, and the other, and yet
Yep.
that person may have never, you've never talked to them about that. So that's a big part of my process too.
That's a really
It's
good point.
I I often start
Mm-hmm.
with what I call these discovery confidential one-on-one interviews with everybody who's a
Mm-hmm.
stakeholder in a good
Oh,
outcome.
yes.
And so in some cases that's even been spouses. you to get a better handle on
Interesting. So
what
explain that
is
though.
everybody. Well, especially for business owners, um,
Mm-hmm.
they can truly believe in what they're saying, and yet
Mm.
there's so much going on unconsciously, because and you've been a business
Mhm.
owner, you're trying to keep your arms around so many things that it can,
Everything.
as you were saying
Mhm.
earlier, it could just be so overwhelming. And so to have those
Mhm.
insights from all the people that are impacted by
Mm.
whatever your plans are, because whatever you do is going to have this ripple, right? And
Mhm.
and if there's been a lack of any transparency, which is another way of saying communication about what
Right.
is going to happen, especially if people are observing that somebody's less available,
Mhm.
or if they're observing that somebody's 60 something now,
Mhm.
somebody's, and
Yeah.
I don't want to say even worse, but somebody's 70 now, it's like, and so there's this, people aren't stupid. And whether it's
You
clients
start
or
thinking about that.
employees,
Yeah.
they're thinking about it, whether you're talking about it or not. So,
And whether you're working on it. Yeah.
and so it really is, my process is really just grounded in this idea that we have to engage with people, because if you attempt, and even if, maybe even worse, if you're successful at
Mhm.
executing a transaction, like for a
Mhm.
privately owned business, or having a CEO or somebody in a C-suite step down,
Mhm.
but the successor really isn't ready, then on the other side of that, where things start to kind of that the wheels come off the cart, so to speak,
Yep.
is all the emotions people get up in them because of unmet expectations.
I love this. And I love it because, my HR heart is happy when you start talking about transparency and communication and just keeping that process engaged because that's where it can totally go off the rails if not executed properly. And one
And
thing
I was
sorry,
just
go
going to say,
ahead.
I was just going to say too, it's like, it kind of gets back to that idea, and this is why it's so foundational for me. If
Hmm.
you, as the leader, don't, I'm going to be bold here, if you don't fundamentally believe in the value of win-win, and that my
Hmm.
win is not at your expense, and yours isn't at mine either, but most often it's probably yours, even if it's not intentional, if your
Hmm.
win in your transition plan is perceived
Hmm.
as at my expense or at her expense or at his
Exactly.
expense, it's kind of like all this stuff is happening below the surface.
Hmm.
And so it's really helping through the coaching. It's not just the guidance, it's really, it's helping people to kind of zoom out and see the larger picture of, here's
Hmm.
the impact of when you're making assumptions and you have
Hmm.
these expectations that you've not kind of vetted or validated, that people understand what they are out loud.
Hmm.
Otherwise, everybody could be operating on completely different assumptions about what's happening, what my role is, and you can have hurt feelings, you can have
Hmm.
people pissed off, you can have people
Yeah.
one foot out the door, any number of things that aren't good.
That's right. That's right. And again, it will circumvent everything that you're doing to create a positive force and momentum with succession planning and leadership. And so that's why it's important. And what I was going to say is, there are succession planning tools. There are performance management tools that also have a succession planning component. I don't like them. I think that I think it's good from a document storage perspective, but working with someone like yourself is more about that customized approach because it's not a one size fits all. It's not,
Right.
yeah, it's not something that you can walk it like you can have your succession planning tool and then just use that and know exactly what to do and how to communicate. What do those one-on-ones look like? What's the formal training? What's involved? Who's the owner? I mean, I can keep going on, and I know that you relate to this, but there's a lot into the succession planning process. And I think it's because that's why many leaders do not actively do it and they put their head in the sand.
It's interesting because I've started, using this term, player coach.
Hmm.
And so, as a coach,
Mm-hmm.
it's not my intention to be an essential wing woman indefinitely. it's more to prepare both that current leader or business owner and the successors to have to build these skills, these capabilities, these better communication or approaches to communication, so that
Yeah.
they are truly communicating. And
Mm.
because I think that that's the thing that's missing. You could have the tools, the kind of tools that you're talking about, and they can be useful as either a framework or guidance for what we're trying to do. But if you, and I'm using but instead of and, intentional, but if there's not that element of, but we actually do want to hear
Yeah.
this junior person or the successor's views, and it's have it
Mm.
be, because I feel like this is part of my whole thing is it doesn't have to all be on that CEO or all be on that business owner.
That,
It's like
right.
have it be collaborative,
Such a good
like
point. It's a
kind of
two-way communication.
co-create this
Yeah.
plan, and that way you have their buy-in. You have a
Right.
better sense of what are they excited about. It may mean that
Mm.
do we need to hire? Is it, and for a lot of especially business owners,
Mm-hmm.
it if you bootstrapped this thing,
Mm-hmm.
and there's all kinds of things that are amazing about how you've created this business with real value that has the potential
Mm-hmm.
for real legacy and sustainability, et cetera, et cetera. And yet who you are and who the
Mm-hmm.
business is now, it's
Mm-hmm.
probably not going to be served by a mini me. It
Mm.
may even require 2 to 3 people to truly fill your shoes because it's
Wow.
not the same business that it was.
That is, I think you should drop the mic. Your badass edges are showing right now because that's such a good point. And I think we need to stop sitting in this box of thinking, oh, it just needs to be one person replacing me. Well, and maybe because also you think, well, I did it. And but maybe you're a high
And
functioning
you just hello.
right
If
there.
if they're a baby boomer or early Gen Xer, they're thinking that way.
Exactly.
And so, and it doesn't help because it's kind of like, how's that
Mm,
working for you ultimately?
right.
Because it's not win-win oriented, because it doesn't
No.
take into account, because if you approach this from here are the boxes I need to check,
Mm-hmm.
the buckets I need to fill,
Mm-hmm.
and I've decided you're gonna fill them with
Mm-hmm.
no interaction, no understanding of, what do they want, what do they enjoy doing. So that's why it's having that. It starts with the leader. It's like you
Right.
have to lead yourself first and
Self leadership.
you have to what you're trying to accomplish and why,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's
Mm-hmm.
bringing in that other person. Even by engaging them, you're being more of a true leader to them, and that collaborative approach is
Mm-hmm.
really what's essential for saying, okay, we know these are, especially the tools that you're talking about, we can
Mm-hmm.
use these as a guide, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also listening to that person. If they have the same list of love it and hate it as you
Mm-hmm.
do, awesome. But we still want to make sure that somebody's covering the hate it call.
Exactly.
And
That's
then
that's a
it's
good way
like
of
our,
putting it.
and
Yeah.
so I oftentimes use the analogy of a relay race. It's like if you're the CEO or the leader,
Uh-huh.
how many lanes are you
Mm-hmm.
covering? Which means do you have 2 batons, 3 batons, 5 batons? So we have to find an owner
Mm-hmm.
for each one of
Mm-hmm.
those batons. And so in the short run, it may not be the person stepping into the CEO role, and yet,
Mm-hmm.
because the CEO role may be somewhat different with a new person in that seat, but we still
Mm-hmm.
have to make sure
Right.
that those lanes are covered.
You're absolutely right. I have so many thoughts whenever as you're talking and just thinking through the fact that doesn't mean just because you're carrying all those batons doesn't mean you're very good at holding them, right? You may be juggling them, you may have dropped one, picked it back up. It doesn't mean that you're the right person to be carrying that baton. It's just that was just the nature of the position, and it evolved, and maybe we didn't change the structure. But
And
also,
it can be powerful too to like initiate by going through that exercise so early in the process.
right.
Then the initial thing is we've got to get rid of these things in that hate it column. So you've
Mhm.
got more bandwidth to be that player coach to, because that's the other thing too, is if
Mhm.
you are not, if you don't value the engagement and the energy that you would invest in this other person, and it's the
Mhm.
relationship that
Right.
really allows them to be more prepared. It's a part of it.
Mhm.
Yes, there's skills. Yes, there's all these other things that there needs to be transparency around. But it's really, we've got to think about where you invest your precious time
Mm.
now. In fact, I watched a keynote the other day by Robert Glazer, who's written a couple books with Elevate in the title.
Yeah.
He's one of my favorite weekly newsletters too. But he talked about every time a business grows
Mhm.
or doubles in size, you
Mhm.
break 50% of the processes and you break 50% of the people. And oftentimes, by the time people and organizations are talking about succession planning,
Mhm.
that's what makes it so difficult to start, is because they've already grown past that point of comfort, and now everybody's moving so fast that they're they lose, even if initially they cared about people,
Mhm.
in the throes of everything they've got going on, you can lose that. And you can also
Mhm.
have somebody taking on and still doing all the things that should have been delegated. And so
Should
that's
have been delegated.
part of the coaching value add that I'm sure you
Mhm.
bring to your clients too, is this
Yeah.
person that's able to see from the
Mhm.
outside and help you to figure out what do you need to let go of so that we can focus on this more strategic thinking and developing your next level leadership skills.
Yeah, and if you think about the people capital, if you're doing this exercise and continue to even evaluate your current workload, whether it's tied to succession planning or not, then you will be, in essence, giving a project, giving a new task to someone that more than likely enjoys it. And then guess what? They want to show up for work. They want to continue and have a commitment to you and the organization. And so then it's going back to another, win win win.
Right.
And so there's just so much potential here if it's taking the leader to make this decision and be very intentional about how they're showing up, the work that they're doing, how are they making an impact. So that, and I think that that's actually a really good segue to share with our listeners that we've been reading an article, and that's you and I, and it actually was just perfect timing where I got this article from one of my clients and thought it was fascinating. And then I sent it to you and I said, you know what? We are the perfect people based on our experience, background, expertise, what we see, to really just have a discussion around this article. So I feel like I've teased long enough. But the article title is Do Not Bring Your Whole Self to Work. So let me just ask you, and this may be an unpopular opinion. I'm not sure. Maybe just my portion will be unpopular. But what did you think about that article, Lori?
Well, I could see some humor in it. I think the author's perspective, I get it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay.
because the way I perceived it is that she's got, I don't want to say it's a negative take, but it's an assumption that whole
Mm-hmm.
self means, ugh, ick,
Yeah.
all your, and yeah, we all have probably icky parts. Icky's a
There's good and
technical
bad.
term,
There's
you
good and
know,
bad.
but we all have icky parts. And yet, I think there's some place between this kind of negative
Mm-hmm.
implication of whole self, like you're, you know, I don't know, rolling out of bed and rolling into the office and, letting everything
Mhm.
hang out. Because I come back to that idea of win, win, win again. Is
Right.
that you get to be you, but it's still within that context of what kind of company are you
Mhm.
working for? And it's not about,
Mhm.
and I grew up in banking at a time when, again, women wore those floppy little ties and tried to just
Mhm.
look like
Mhm.
replicas of men. And,
Mhm.
so I don't advocate for that. My perspective
Mhm.
is more around if it's the importance of leadership really getting to know their people. And that doesn't mean you have to know
Mhm.
every little some last night my husband said blah blah blah
Mhm.
blah blah, and it's
Mhm.
it's kind of like there's an there's appropriate lines that can be drawn. And so I kind of feel like the article, it's not that she takes it too far, but yeah, there are TED Talks
It
on
has
whole
a negative
self, but
undertone.
it has
Yeah.
an undertone of, don't do that. And
Mhm.
just, so I'm kind of dancing around this, but it really,
Mhm.
from my perspective, and I don't know if you can hear the siren in the background, apology for that. But from my perspective, um, people matter. And so, as a leader, it does
Mhm.
also matter. Your clients matter. Being successful as a company matters. So, where
Mhm.
is that? Where's that sweet spot
Yeah.
where
I think
you get to matter, but your
right.
stuff is not at my expense. But I'm not squashing you either. you know.
Mhm. The article does have a negative undertone, but what I will say that appealed to me, it says, do not bring your whole self to work, bring your role self to work.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm going to admit something. And again, this was years ago, but I didn't like it whenever, employees would dress down to work and for work and that, tattoos were visible, piercing. I mean, like, I was super conservative from a dress perspective at one point as an HR professional, and it's it's just so funny, how far you can evolve. But that's like one example because expression is it's an important part of who we are. But I still think that some people actually use work as a getaway to other pieces of their life, and I want it to be a safe and comfortable place, but I don't think that means that you bring your whole self. That means
Mm-hmm.
that I am so happy that I have a filter that I don't say all the things that I think. It's just no one should say all the things that they think. I'm
Right,
glad that
because
there's
there's something about candid and kind. There's
yeah,
something about just like boundaries. That's why, you hear people, especially you being a former HR person, it's
that's
like
right.
how you don't talk about salary, or you don't, although
That's
gains have been
protected.
made in certain industries because, like for
Hmm.
women and people of color in particular, where if people didn't talk about salary, probably
Hmm.
some of the gains wouldn't have been made. But there's still some element of,
Hmm.
um, what's appropriate. And I do think there should be transparency now about what people get paid. And yet, does there need to be, some of these other things? I do also still, because I'm with you. It's like
Hmm.
when the pendulum swung to
Hmm.
casual everything. It's kind
Hmm.
of like, okay, there's a little space between rolling out of bed
Right.
and that's just me. And yet I know there's,
Exactly. This
you
is
know, because I'm
it.
always going to have an outfit on. Okay.
Right. And classy, very classy. I'm usually always gonna wear pearls. It's sometimes hard not to wear pearls with my gym outfit. Okay, so and I'm a millennial, so listen, the stereotypes are not true.
Right.
Right.
Right. Right.
But at the same point in time, that does not have a reflection on work productivity. I've seen individuals that have worn sweatpants every day and they are high performers. Um, that's just how it
Yeah.
goes. But there's one piece of the article, and it ends with one of the attractions of the workplace is that it is a place where there is a shared endeavor. That endeavor is
Yes.
called work. You need to be friendly to be a good colleague, but you do not need to be friends. You need to be capable of empathy. but you do not need to constantly emote. You have to turn up, try hard, and play your part. You have to bring your role self. Like that resonates to me.
Yes. Because that's, so many organizations, large and small, like really big companies, are really
Mhm.
just a collection of teams. Smaller companies,
Yeah.
they are, depending on how small, they may be one team. And so it's realizing that, and I think this is can be a challenge for owners, going back to
Hmm.
what you said at the top of our conversation. There is a lot of companies are, I'll even go as far as say stressed by
Mm.
talent. I know a lot of the big tech companies
Hmm.
are laying off now, and I
Right.
live in Seattle, and there's everything from Microsoft to Costco in our backyard, in terms
Hmm.
of brand, Amazon, Microsoft, etc.
Right.
And there are layoffs going on. And yet, at the same time, there's kind of that mid tier and smaller, especially in the financial services world, every independent investment firm, pretty much coast to coast, has a help
Mm.
wanted sign. And
Yeah.
so it's just this reality that we've got a
Hmm.
talent shortage, and yet if business owners or leaders have a mindset of we just need to get a butt in that seat, it doesn't necessarily serve that person well, and it
Hmm.
doesn't serve our larger objective. So
You're right.
it is important that people are aware of it's not about being best friends, but yes, we need good teammates and defining what that is, because I think
Hmm.
that's one of the things that I don't always get involved with, but it's
Right.
a part of the range of ways that I could support people is recognizing if the
Hmm.
culture that has been created by default, then we need an intervention, and that can have an impact on who
Mm.
you hire, who stays, because we're
Hmm.
trying to reset things a bit, and
Yep.
reorienting ourselves to yes, we want it to be a great place to work. Yes, we want to be enjoy our work, and we want to be successful because that's what leads to the potential for legacy. That's what leads to a business being sustainable.
Exactly.
And where is that sweet spot? And so that can mean not so much that about the people not bringing their whole selves, but it's
Hmm.
that we get just good fit human beings and that have some maybe shared values. Have it doesn't have to be shared interests.
Hmm.
It's like whether you've got certain people that love to play golf, you could have people that are true introverts and they're
Hmm.
never going to do the happy hour with
Yeah,
everybody.
that's
Yet,
right.
but that doesn't mean that they can't actually be great teammates.
Yeah, colleagues, coworkers, absolutely. Yeah, and I do think there's a lot of value in talking about that creating or really culture by default is not the method. It's really building a very intentional team, an intentional culture, and that's more about the pieces that you're talking about. There's so much value, and I think we could go everywhere in our conversations because we're very aligned with the types of leaders that we help, and honestly our whole value system as it comes to the workplace. You can just tell we have synergy here. So I think it'd be really
Yes.
interesting. What if we brought one more person that's completely opposite of us and
Yeah.
you know
Now
we
that
just
could be fun.
yeah, exactly. Just hashed it out.
Yeah.
That's but just as we're I like to say that we're rounding third, we're coming into home. I love our conversation, but I know that there are listeners that may really be interested in just reaching out to you to customize their succession planning, be more intentional about their culture, so it does lead to leadership legacy. I mean, you wear a lot of different hats, but how could someone reach out to you?
I would say best bet is connect on LinkedIn and send me a message, or my website is www.laurienichols.com. Very creative, and so the email address is Laurie@laurienichols.com, and reach out and let's just have an initial conversation. And I always love to hear people's stories and kind of where they're
Mhm.
at. And if nothing else, I can provide some encouragement.
Oh, I love that. All right. So if you had, and I always ask this at the end, because I want you to have that platform, and I put you on the spot, and I say, if you had to give one piece of advice to the leaders that are listening, it could be about succession planning, anything that you want, really. What would that one piece of advice be?
Examine your assumptions about your people.
Hmm. Examine your assumptions about your people.
What are you assuming?
Huh.
And reach out, ask. I could be all wet, but I'm kind of thinking X, Y, and Z. What do you think? And so it's a way of it's really getting to know people, and
Mm-hmm.
it's practical when you think about it. Because the more
Examine
you
your.
know how people are really thinking, the better you can plan, the better you can lead them.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. I loved seeing all your badass edges today. I loved
Thank
talking
you.
with you. I bet you never forget this
I
conversation.
I will never forget this conversation, and thank you. I It was fun, and I look forward to seeing how we might, you know, continue this conversation, or have an
Yeah.
opportunity to support each other.
Uh, I 1,000% agree. All right, to all our listeners, if you thought that this was amazing, actually even lukewarm interest at this point, I want you to give us a like, a follow, subscribe. Also, feel free to go to jadawillis.com and make sure you're signing up for our updates. We actually have a really neat thing that once you go to the website, we're going to help you redesign your priority list. Hopefully, you could reclaim some of that time. So, thank you so much, Lori. And her
Thank you, Jada.
details are actually in the bottom of the description. And you can reach out to her today. She is a wealth of knowledge, and we are so thankful that she joined us on the Jada Willis Experience.